The Game Boy Advance, or GBA, came out over 25 years ago, on June 11th, 2001. I've been very nostalgic for my childhood lately, so today we are going to take a trip down memory lane. During Christmas of 2001, the GBA was undoubtedly the hot item. I wanted one, and all my friends wanted one, which is why for Christmas that year I begged for one. And I didn't get it, because times were tough, I guess. My stupid rich cousin got one though, and spent the rest of that Christmas lording it over me. It's been 25 years, and no, I never did forgive him for that transgression. I did, however, get one the following year, with 2 games no less. One of the 2 games was Super Mario Advance 2, Super Mario World, a game so great that I would replay it endlessly in the years that followed. It's still probably my favorite Mario game, besides maybe Mario Sunshine. I'm also really glad to say that it's one of the few games from that time that's still in my collection today. The other game was Alienators, Evolution Continues. I have no freaking idea why I got this game. I'm pretty sure it was just something in the bargain bin and my dad knew one game wouldn't be enough. I played Alienators a few times as a kid, but never really played it beyond the 2nd level. Coming back to it now, and I think I know why kid me never made it far in Alienators. It's not bad, but it's also not good. It's just a very mediocre action platformer, of which there were a metric ton of on the Game Boy Advance. I want to like this game because of nostalgia, but man is it just okay, and even that may be a stretch, honestly speaking. So that's what I had to play for a while, that I personally owned at least. I did borrow some friends' games like Frogger Adventure 1, that was pretty fun. However, for the sake of this video's length, I'm going to stick to only games I owned. I've touched a lot of games on the GBA over the years, and I don't want this video to be around 4 hours just talking about each one individually. The next game I got wasn't for a few months later. It was one of the first games I was excited to play, as it was a follow-up to a game I already considered legendary as a slightly younger kid. It was a game that I was sure was going to be legendary and change the face of gaming, a game that would outsell all of its predecessors. That game was Pokemon Sapphire, and it kinda did none of those things. Real quick note, you guys are seeing Pokemon Emerald footage in this video, as unfortunately I don't own Sapphire currently. In one of the few rare times that kid me was completely wrong, Pokemon Sapphire was kind of a failure. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, despite what modern fans may think, during the time of their release were viewed a lot more negatively, and the Pokemon franchise was seen as a fad.
The whole Poke craze, I mean, Pokemon was really huge a few years ago. I think people are like now Dragon Ball Z, and they're looking for other things. I mean, I think you're still stuck in the past a little there, Thumb Blister.
While I played my copy of Sapphire to death as a kid, I always viewed it as kinda hollow. Kid me undoubtedly couldn't articulate his feelings about the game, yet modern me can. Pokemon Sapphire on the sleek and new and much more powerful Game Boy Advance hardware felt like a downgrade from Pokemon Silver on the archaic and aged Game Boy hardware. Before people tried to dogpile me in the comments, yes, Pokemon Gold and Silver can be played on the original Game Boy. Pokemon Crystal can't be played on original Game Boy. For some reason, that version of Gen 2 was made only for the Game Boy Color. However, the original 2 Gen 2 games can 100% be played on an original black and white Game Boy. No idea why you would want to play them there though, when they have such good color palettes. Anyways, back when I was a kid, I was kinda disappointed in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. I understand now why I didn't like them as much as I do Gold and Silver. However, back then, they just felt kinda weak. I have a lot more thoughts on Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but I'm going to save them for a future video. I think another thing that fueled my disappointment in Pokemon Sapphire is the next game I got was Golden Sun. My timeline of events is a little hazy, but I would say I got Pokemon Sapphire around April of that year, and then I got Golden Sun sometime in May or June. I remember being in a Target as a kid grocery shopping with my dad and wandering off to the gaming aisle. Something about the cover art spoke to kid me, and I knew I had to get it. I only had $10, but the game was on sale for $20, and my dad spotted me for the rest. Looking back on it now, he probably did that so I had something to do during summer rather than just bugging him the whole time. The first time I booted up Golden Sun as a kid was sort of magical. I mean, mean, the game is so immediately gripping. You're in a village that is on the brink of collapse from a literal flash flood, rushing to try and save your childhood best friend's little brother, and then suddenly you get ambushed by two random blue and pink people. Holy crap, what a way to start a game. Then you have the graphics, which were just spectacular for the time. Sure, they may be a bit dated in the modern day, however, put yourself in 2002 when this game launched, and holy nuts, you had never seen graphics like this on a handheld before. I still find this incredibly impressive by Game Boy Advance standards, at least. I hate to say it, but I definitely compared Pokemon Sapphire to Golden Sun back in the day. I know for a fact that at one point I said to one of my friends something along the lines of, I wish Pokemon could look as good as Golden Sun. Can you really blame kid me though? I could keep gushing about my memories of Golden Sun, however I feel like that's not really fair, as believe it or not, I haven't played through it since high school. I've wanted to replay it now for over a decade, but I haven't for whatever reason. If you want me to make a video on it though, just let me know in the comments, as I definitely wouldn't mind an excuse to finally replay it. During the summer of that year, I went to the flea market for the first time in my life. I remember back then being really confused by the idea of it. I go there to buy stuff that someone else used before? Isn't that weird? Well, I'm glad I did go though, because I found a game reseller who naturally had a selection of Game Boy Advance games. I don't remember any of the games he had besides the one I ended up buying, which was Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Why did kid me want Castlevania Circle of the Moon? Well, around that time we started getting this channel called G4 in our house, which was this channel dedicated to gaming. As a kid obsessed with video games, whenever I had TV time and cartoons that I liked weren't on, I was watching G4. One of the games G4 had hyped up at that point was Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Naturally, as a kid, when you hear about something a lot, you want to play it, which is why I made it my mission to get Castlevania Aria of Sorrow that summer. In a huge blunder on my part, I only knew that the game was called Castlevania. I had no idea that it was this long-running series that dated back to the original Nintendo Entertainment System. I also had no idea that the subtitle wasn't Circle of the Moon, so as far as I knew back then, the games were one and the same. Despite my error, I think Kid Me still did pretty good on this one. Castlevania Circle of the Moon was the first ever Metroidvania I ever played. While I'm not as crazy about it as some people are, it is still a style of game I really love. It was also my first Castlevania, and man am I glad it introduced me to the series, as Castlevania would become one of my favorite game series from that point forward. I love the setting of the series with its gothic horror aesthetic. It goes so well with the use of one of the most classic horror villains, Dracula. I also really like the DSS card system in Circle of the Moon. Mixing the cards and seeing what cool power I got was always really fun to do. Despite the aspects of this game that I really liked, Kid Me always felt overwhelmed by the game's difficulty. It's odd, while Castlevania is a series known for its difficulty, Circle of the Moon isn't really known for high difficulty. Kid Me still struggled with it and died a ton. Heck, the only reason why I beat this game back then was because I found a spot where I could just cheese the final Dracula fight. Nonetheless, I still really loved this game, as it opened my eyes to both the world of Metroidvanias and to one of my favorite game series in Castlevania. Unfortunately, not all was good in my little GBA world, because during Thanksgiving of that year, I lost it. You see, we were on holiday at one of my dad's work partner's home in West Virginia, and I lost it somewhere in that house. I remember searching the place for hours, and it was just gone. My dad told his friend, and his friend said that if he found it, he'd give it to my dad, but unfortunately, he couldn't find it either, so I was just out of a Game Boy Advance for a little while. So I did the only thing a kid could do, and naturally for Christmas, I begged my dad for a Game Boy Advance SP. Yeah, at that point, the SP had been out for nearly a year, and to be honest, even if I hadn't lost my original GBA, I still probably would have had that at the top of my want list. The SP was just such a huge improvement over the Game Boy Advance. The backlit screen meant that you could finally play games in the dark. I know the GBA I've been showing you all has a backlight, but this is one that I modded a few years ago. No, the original GBA GBA had a screen that was so dark, Nintendo themselves had to put in the FAQ for it that yes, it was supposed to be that dark. The SP finally added a backlight that, honestly, the original GBA should have had from the start. It also added rechargeable batteries, which meant no more begging for batteries. The SP is easily the best console refresh Nintendo ever did, because unlike a lot of the other console refreshes they've done, like the Wii Mini or the Switch Lite, it didn't remove any of the good features of the GBA, it just added more. I ended up getting the GBA SP for Christmas that year, although 3 weeks before the big day, my dad let me know he had gotten it for me, but that I couldn't have it yet, as it was a punishment for losing the original. Those were the 3 longest weeks of my childhood. Since the SP had been my main gift that year, I only got one game with it. I also had gotten my GameCube during summer of that year, so the GBA was unfortunately contending with the GameCube when it came to new games. So when Christmas came around, I asked for way more GameCube games than I did GBA games. The game I got was Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. Back when I was a kid, I absolutely adored both this and Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. Now that time has moved on and I've played a lot more role-playing games, I can say that it's pretty good. I think the battle system is really fun, timing the attacks can really make fights feel more involved than a normal RPG. I loved switching between the dynamic duo to use their respective abilities to solve puzzles. Graphically, the game looked great, still does. However, it's the story where this and most Mario RPGs lose me. I don't know if Nintendo has some rule or something about Mario games always needing to be save the princess and the world. I wish they would stop though, as it makes the stories in a lot of the RPG spin-offs just feel flat. It's that disconnect that probably keeps me from getting into them, and probably also the reason why I'm not really a fan of the Mario series as a whole. Anyways though, the next game I got wasn't until about April or May of the following year. Back when I was a kid, I would go around my trailer park and collect pop bottles from strangers to try and make a buck or two. I have no idea why my dad let me do this, as there were 3 registered PDFs in my trailer park. Anyways though, after a few months of doing that, I saved up enough to buy a new game. I went with a GBA game over a GameCube one, as I just wanted something to play when the TV wasn't available. It also helped that the Game Boy Advance games were a bit cheaper than GameCube games. The game I went with was one that would quickly become one of my favorite games. It was Metroid Zero Mission, and it's still my favorite on the old Game Boy Advance. Why did I want it? Well, honestly, I don't know why. It definitely wasn't because of the commercials made for it. I mean, seriously, why did they go with a gymnast just doing a bunch of jumps? It literally tells you nothing about the game or why I should buy it. I think kid me probably just thought the box looked cool, which, to be fair, adult me also thinks the Zero Mission box art is pretty dope too. This is my favorite Metroid game ever made, easily. I replay it at least once a year, I've watched speedruns for it, I love the game to pieces, and I'm really glad it introduced me to the Metroid series. While not my favorite Nintendo series, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for it. Metroid Zero Mission took me a long time to beat, which made sense, as if you're not paying attention or not good at map reading like Kid Me was, Metroid games can really feel like you're stuck in a rat maze. Despite this, I kept trudging forward. I wanted to see the rest of the game no matter what, as something about the game felt oppressive to the younger me. Besides Castlevania Circle of the Moon, I had never played a game with the level of atmosphere that Metroid Zero Mission had in spades, something that defines this series as a whole. The gameplay was perfect, shooting enemies was fun, yet it was still challenging. My only complaint was the wall jump always felt a bit finicky to me. I mean, you don't need it to beat the game, heck, Kid Me never used it, however I definitely notice it more now when I try to do cool sequence breaks. I could keep going on about Metroid Zero Mission, but this video is getting long enough as is. On to the next game, which is kinda interesting to say the least. You see, by the time I finished Metroid Zero Mission, the Nintendo DS was released. I remember staring at magazine spreads about the DS's launch lineup of games. Super Mario 64, a game that had revolutionized gaming so much that even younger me knew of its impact, was now available to play at any time on a handheld. I wanted a DS so badly, but unfortunately it wasn't in the cards. You see, my family was definitely on the lower side of the tax bracket, which meant the bright, shiny, new handheld was firmly out of my grasp. Heck, I only got a GameCube because it was $100 and came with a game. I remember having dreams about getting a Nintendo DS, and all of a sudden the Game Boy Advance felt lame by comparison. I never stopped playing it, but I remember not liking it as much. However, there was one huge perk to the new handheld being out, and that was the fact that the games for the old one became quite a bit cheaper. This led to my next purchase, which was Super Mario Advance 4 Yoshi's Island. I don't remember exactly when I got Yoshi's Island, but I know it was sometime after I got into 5th grade. I remember looking at screenshots for Yoshi's Island DS and really wanting to play that, so the prequel on GBA made sense to get. I ended up getting Yoshi's Island for only $10 used from GameStop. Looking back on it now, it feels like a bargain. I love Yoshi's Island so much that currently I'm in the production of a full video on it, so I'm going to save what I have to say for that game for that video. The next game I got was sometime during Christmas vacation that year. This was the year I got Final Fantasy IV Advance. Why did I, a 10-year-old boy, ask for this game? Well, it's simple really. I watched my brother play through Final Fantasy X and it seemed amazing, so the idea of having that game on the go seemed amazing. Thanks to my love for Golden Sun, Kingdom Hearts, and Pokemon, I had become a big RPG fan. A genre that is still to this day probably my favorite genre in gaming. Heck, Final Fantasy IV Advanced makes way too much sense for me to ask for. This is the first non-Pokemon RPG I ever actually beat. I know I've listed off a few other RPGs in this video, but I didn't beat them until I got a bit older. Mostly due to me not being able to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Final Fantasy IV wasn't like other RPGs as I never got lost in it. As for only the second time in gaming, I was captivated by the story, the world, the characters, the plot twists and turns, everything. Final Fantasy IV hooked me from the beginning and didn't release its hold until the end. FF4 became one of those fabled obsessions for me in gaming. Much like Kingdom Hearts and Ocarina of Time before it, and Nier Automata and Persona 3 after it, child me became completely and hopelessly obsessed with Final Fantasy IV. I remember very vividly going and talking to random kids about the game during recess at school. Coming back to it now, and I still enjoy FF4 quite a bit, but it's not my favorite Final Fantasy. I think it mainly comes down to the story. You see, kid me wasn't familiar with the tropes that Final Fantasy IV would play off of and even establish. Meanwhile, adult me, yeah, I've seen this song and dance before. Heck, I've seen this same series do this same song and dance better than it has with Final Fantasy IV. Don't get me wrong, I still love the game, it's just not my favorite Final Fantasy anymore. No, my heart will always belong to Crisis Core and 9. Also, for the record, my favorite turn-based RPG that isn't Pokemon is Persona 3 Reload. Final Fantasy IV kept me busy for a long time. I mean, heck, I don't even remember exactly when I got Mega Man 03. Was it during summer, spring, autumn? I don't remember at all. All I remember is I got it for $5 at the flea market. I remember thinking that was a steal, and looking at what I spent for this game completing the box some 20 years later, I can confirm that was in fact a steal. Gosh, kids, I mean it, don't ever give away your old games. You'll regret it when you get older. Moving on to the game, and Mega Man 03 is a real banger for the system. I mean, the action is fast and frantic, the level design is fun, yet also has that classic Mega Man challenge to it. I love that Zero uses what is basically a copyright-free lightsaber for his weapon. Back when I was a kid, I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and even now, I still do think that. I had quite a bit of fun going back to this one for the video, although that could be nostalgia talking. I hadn't played this one since childhood, so maybe I have rose-tinted glasses on. This is making me remember why this was one of my favorites for the system. For the next game, we have to go a few years in the future. About 2 years to be exact. Wait, what gives? Why am I having a time skip now of all times? Well, it's mostly because after Mega Man 03, I got a Nintendo DS Lite, which meant I wasn't really buying GBA games anymore. I mean, I would play anything I could get my hands on, as new games to play were a luxury back then. When I had the chance to buy a game, it definitely wasn't for the GBA anymore though. So why did I buy a GBA game, you may be wondering? Well, basically enough, my dad and I were going on a camping trip for the weekend. Knowing that being in the woods for a few days can be the most boring thing ever, he gave me $10 and told me to try and find something to do for the trip. I remember being a bit frustrated by how little money my dad could give me. I mean, what the heck, I couldn't buy a DS game with only $10, but I also knew not to look a gift horse in the mouth. At this time, we were just barely scraping by, so I knew that $10, while not a lot of money, that could have really helped my dad out, so I I didn't complain and just took what I could get. I ended up in the clearance rack at Walmart where I spotted Drill Dozer. I didn't know much about the game besides that Nintendo Power gave it the GBA Game of the Year award, so I shrugged and took my chance on it. I'm glad I did, as Drill Dozer is something really special for the system. Right off the bat, the game came with a mini comic that basically serves as the backstory. God, I miss when games would do things like this. Also, get a load of how weird looking this cartridge is. I had never seen a GBA game look anything like this. Drill Dozer's funky cartridge is because of the built-in rumble motor. That's right, a few Game Boy Advance games had rumble motors built into the cartridge. This practice actually started on the Game Boy Color, so Nintendo had been doing this for a while. Kid, or teenage me, had no idea about that though, so all I knew was that this was one of the funniest looking cartridges I had ever seen. Unfortunately, the rumble in my cartridge doesn't work anymore. I'm not sure why, it just doesn't work. Maybe someday I'll replace the motor. Not today though, because for now we need to yap at how good of a game Drill Dozer is. Drill Dozer is a 2D platformer where the goal is to get to the end of each stage. Unlike a lot of 2D platformers where you go from simply left to right, Drill Dozer has a gimmick where you basically drill into everything until you find all 3 power-ups, which then lets you clear the level and go on to the next one. It's a unique gimmick that shows off perfectly what your character can do. Your character rides in a mech with a drill. Naturally, the game perfectly reflects that, as drilling is most of what you do. No, I mean it. You even have to drill into cubes to clear larger jumps. The drill effectively acts as an assisted jump, launching your character to the next thing they'll probably drill into. The core gameplay loop is really fun, and I tore through it that weekend. Drill Dozer was the last game I bought while the GBA was still somewhat relevant as a handheld. It's also one of the last games my dad ever bought me, as a few months after that camping trip he would have a seizure and pass away shortly afterwards. It's funny, I remember being pretty bored during that camping trip. I mean, all my dad and I did was just sit in camping trees watching the fire. I remember several times just thinking we could have just stayed home and done this. Looking back on it now though, I wouldn't trade that weekend for anything. I miss you and love you, Dad. Friends, that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked what you saw, please do all the usual YouTube stuff. That's it for me though, so I'm gonna head out for now, but until next time, peace.